Hey everybody, welcome back to Rationally Speaking with me, Martin Turner, and Stuart Carrington. What we thought we'd do is we'd kind of dip into things that people have sent us, bits of media, videos, content, quotes from athletes, or indeed entire interviews, and kind of react to it from an REBT perspective and dig out the REBT details from those real world examples. I think we're going to get into a bit of a video here, aren't we, Stu?
Yeah, this is Ben Proud, the British swimmer from the Paris Olympics, and he'd never won an Olympic medal before, and he'd just qualified when this interview had taken place from his semi-final to qualify for the final, and the interviewer is going to posit some questions towards Ben around the importance of winning a medal because he hadn't done so already.
So we'll take a bit of a listen, and then we'll stop it, and then we'll have a bit of a chat.
Also, yeah. You have one of everything. I mean, you've won everything apart from the Olympic Games. Do you really want this one?
Yes and no. I mean, of course, I wouldn't be here if I didn't want it. But at the same time, I'm here this time without that kind of, I don't have to do it. It's not compulsive. I want to because I love performing now and I love racing and I just want to get there and have another experience. Good job. But I'm not held hostage by that fact that I have to be on the podium.
So yeah, really interesting, isn't it, that?
Yeah, there's so many things that pop out for me there. And what I quite like about this, I'm sure we're going to get into this in a moment, Martin, like kind of get into the weeds of it. But there's this kind of healthy side that the interviewer even alluded to, this healthy attitude. So there's this like kind of athlete well-being aspect. And then there's this alternative view, which is, does it show that he doesn't care? Does it show that like he doesn't want it enough? Maybe that kind of attitude is why he doesn't have an Olympic gold medal like prior. So I guess what I'd like to do is kind of talk about both those angles through an REBT lens. So should we start with the first one around well-being?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, what do you think about the comment about that's a healthy attitude? Why do you think instinctively, we just assume that that's healthy?
I think when he says, I'm not held hostage to this and I don't have to have it. So I think when we have this language of these kind of inflexible demands, like I have to, I must to, I ought to, those sort of words. Well, what happens if we don't do it? Kind of by definition and through accuracy of language, then that means it will be the end of the world if we don't. And then we're going to maximize like any sort of discomfort, any distress if it weren't to happen. Because we've just said we must do, we have to. Now, of course, like Ben would be disappointed if he didn't medal in the final, because he just said he wants to do it. Like he would like to be on the podium, be really nice, but so it would be unpleasant if he wasn't. But he doesn't need to maximize this by now saying, well, now it's the end of the world, which isn't necessarily accurate. It's just disappointing and not what he wanted.
It's the key there is not what he wanted, isn't it? Rather than demanded. He's not here saying I have to and I need to, and that's seemed like a bit of a psychological shift for him. I think that athletes are at pains to tell you how much they want it and how motivated they are, but this particular example and other examples that we can go through, they're at pains to tell you how, even though they want it, that they're not in that space where they're needing it and they're placing a demand on it. It's still possible to do well and succeed with really wanting to succeed, really wanting to express yourself and fulfill your potential without slipping into this demand. And I say slipping into because that's sort of technically accurate. It seems to be the case that the more that I want something, the more likely I am to then fix a rigid demand on that want. Things that I just casually want, I'm unlikely to demand. It's usually those things that I really, really want more than anything in the world ever. I then say, okay, well, demand it, because that feels like it's a piece of controllability then. If I demand it, then it feels like it's within my control more. But obviously, it's actually the reverse is true. So to me, what sticks out there is this idea of negating the demand. Yes, I want, but I don't have to. There's no must. There's no absolutely should. And therefore, dealing with the consequences of maybe not attaining something becomes more easy, because you're less likely to awfulize and catastrophize and all the rest of it. But also it actually kind of paradoxically makes it more likely for you to actually succeed, because you just balanced your mindset. You haven't got that intensity of demands. You've got that motivation of want and that directiveness of want, that intensity that you need for that performance, but you're not spilling over into this kind of obligation. He makes a great point about being taken hostage. You haven't got that, sword of Damocles pressure associated with that drive.
I mean, one thing you said there, you said this term mindset, and this is like a term that I find that people attribute to an athlete, like kind of post fact. So if somebody loses, then it's like, oh, well, they weren't in the right frame of mind. They didn't want it enough. They don't have the winning mentality, etc., etc. And I've always kind of rejected this, because I find, well, actually, these people at the top of their game, they're elite athletes. You can't get there without being very driven, without being incredibly motivated, etc. And so, well, I think what's a really important distinction, it's quite a nuanced difference, but I think it's a really important one, is to show that, well, athletes can accept that they might lose and they might not win. And the second they're held hostage to it, as Ben says, I think it's a wonderful term to use, then it actually makes it less likely to happen. So I guess what I want to kind of get into there is ask you, why is it less likely to happen?
Well, I mean, from what we know about the evidence around this, is that as you apply more pressure to yourself using demands, as you face pressure situations, it might be that your anxiety becomes less controllable. It actually starts to affect your performance negatively. Think about one of the studies that we did with Australian rules footballers with our colleagues in Australia. We found that these idea of demands actually weren't that bad for performance when the pressure was off. Soon as that anxiety is dialed up and the pressure's up, then the demands start to become problematic. So it kind of takes you over the edge, if you like. It makes some of that performance anxiety that could be good, starts to make it more unmanageable. You've dialed it up too far using these demands, and it makes sense, because what you're doing is kind of almost taking your brain into survival mode. I have to, I must. It's like, this is do or die. And then you're expecting it to perform in those circumstances. So I think that's partly why it's paradoxical, why it works in reverse, that if I demand, I'm actually less likely to get it. It's when the pressure's on that it's less likely.
So you mentioned this like kind of do or die attitude. We hear kind of athletes say this a lot. Coaches might say this a lot. And we know that these kind of irrational beliefs are typically socialized in certain environments, and sports would be one. So why do you think that people might try to push athletes into thinking, oh, it is do or die, or, you have to want it more than anything and you can't accept losing, etc. People might almost, I was going to say demand then, but almost like want their athletes to think like this. Why, if we know that this is kind of paradoxical or a contradiction to what they actually want to achieve, why do we think people want athletes to do that?
Well, I think there's two things there. I think first point straight away is that I don't know if we do collectively understand that it can work paradoxically. I don't know if we do collectively understand that demanding things can make it less likely for us to get those things. I think instinctively we think in the reverse. But the second thing is it's to do with control, controllability of outcome. If I say to you, you have to be at this meeting at 9:00. I'm trying to control your behaviour. I'm trying to impress upon you there is no choice, there is no option. You have to be there at 9:00. If I said to you, hey, look, I want you to be there at 9, but whatever, if you don't make it, then maybe you're not going to be on time, and maybe I haven't been able to control that behaviour. So, self-regulation, the regulation of others, I think this language is extremely effective. But the problematic part of that is this language also, places pressure upon those individuals, especially when it's internalized. So things like you must be at a certain meeting on time, then okay, that's fine. But you must win a gold medal, or you must win this race. Problem is, that's not really a controllable situation.
Mm.
You can't really control that outcome. You know, you can certainly control the aspects around your performance and what you bring to it. You can't control the outcome. So when you place those demands on that outcome, to me, it's about trying to control the outcome, which is why it makes it all the more irrational, you know?
Particularly in a field like sports where there's always an element of chance, and some sports perhaps more than others, but that's actually an appealing aspect of sports, is that there might be some things that we simply cannot control, and we can do everything right.
Yeah.
And in future episodes, I have some examples of that, and it still doesn't kind of come off for you, and yet, you've done everything you can, you performed really well. You mentioned here about kind of control and external regulation, and one thing that jumps out to me, and this is another kind of appealing aspect of REBT for me, is its relationship with existing theories, and self-determination would be one that kind of jumped out there, where Ben says, I want to be here, I enjoy what I do. So the second that we maybe feel controlled, so to use your kind of meeting example, if you're trying to control someone, say you have to be here at this point, you're probably then thinking, well, I'm going to this meeting because I have to, not because I want to. And what's that going to look like for performance? What's that going to look like for long-term motivation, long-range happiness? Where, for these athletes, those are really important attributes.
You hear it all the time in the way people describe their working practices. Oh, I have to go to this meeting. I have to go to this event. I have to be here. I have to be there. This have to isn't the same as want to. So even in that small way, if you're somebody in a leadership position, even just adjusting your language in that sense can give a better impression about those working practices. If you're thinking, well, I have to do this, it's maybe I want to, but mainly I have to. Then you have to understand that's a different type of motivation, and one that maybe it will give you what you need for that performance, but one that's pretty unsustainable over a longer period of time. More sustainable motivation tends to be more intrinsic, more of the I want to because I love it and I really get value from this. And I think, again, it's that kind of language of have to that's passed around and usually passed down from leaders. That's about control, about forcing you to care as much as possible about the outcome because I need that outcome for me. We need it as an organisation. It's a real simplistic idea of the more you care about it, the more likely you are to achieve it. But it's not that simple. Sometimes there's no amount of caring you could do about the outcome. There's no amount of demanding you could do that secures the outcome. It's a part of it, but it's not the whole part. And in fact, as we've discussed, can actually work against you. Now, Ben's not saying, I don't care about the outcome. I don't care about this performance. He's going, yeah, I care about it. I want to win, but I don't get to demand it. Because that puts him in a different space. That takes him outside of caring almost and puts him into do or die mentality. And I think some athletes take a long time to understand that. And they have to go through multiple failures and multiple challenges to understand how to get that balance. Or they've been exposed to rational emotive behaviour therapy, or they've worked with a sports psychologist that's introduced them to this way of thinking. And then they can get there quicker, can't they? But at some point, I think that if an athlete can land upon that idea and can balance that off and can have that intensity for performance, but also keep demands at bay and say, I really want, but it's not a must, it's not that I have to, then I think they're able to just regulate their emotion better for performance.
I completely agree. And to buttress that perhaps for the listeners as well, is we know that athletes that demonstrate greater levels of intrinsic motivation, they're much more likely to persist, particularly in times of failure. So they're much more likely to not give up. They're much more likely to strategize, particularly in their own time. So actually kind of think about, sort of be proactive and be adaptive and think, well, what could I have done differently to improve even further? Even if they have succeeded, they think differently. Also, if they haven't succeeded, they think, well, what would I do differently next time? Which I think everyone would agree is a really healthy way of looking at failure. And they're much more likely to socialize with others and kind of interact with like-minded people and try to draw information out from people with similar experiences. So we have all of these wonderful qualities from intrinsic motivation, and yet, like you say, from a leadership position, it's almost like leaders and coaches sometimes try to take that away from the athletes because they fall into this trap, if you like, of you have to really want it, you have to really care. Now, I think just to kind of add another element to that on, by going into that space, as you call it, of this demand, and it's kind of human to do that. We really want something. We tend to jump very quickly to, I really want it, therefore I must have it. By going into that space, and when we don't have it, well, now what happens? If we don't have it and we feel we must win, well, now I'm a loser, so we might depreciate from ourselves. And one of the studies that you and I did, Martin, a few years ago, we found that those elite level athletes self-depreciate significantly less than other populations, recreational athletes or non-athletes. And so, well, actually, athletes don't really believe that. They don't really think that they can lose, but they don't think they're a loser. If someone doesn't succeed, or get what they want, then they're disappointed. But they don't necessarily think that they're useless at it or worthless anymore.
I think experienced athletes learn that being a participant in sport at any level, there's failure there. Now, elite athletes have usually failed on a big stage and at really important times, at a national level, let's say. So they kind of understand that, oh, well, next week I'll just go and train again and then work on my limitations and build on my strengths. And then, and then the next game I actually did quite well. So they prove to themselves they're not completely useless and complete losers by having to, by nature of their job, come back from that pretty quickly. Now, lots of us might try football for the first time, do really badly, and say, "Well, I'm not doing that again." So we get to hold on to our "I'm a loser, I'm an idiot, I'm rubbish at this" belief, and we just it's an option for us not to do it. For them, that's their job, that's their careers. They keep going, and over time they iterate those failures to the extent where they can't possibly say I'm a complete failure because I know I can come back from failure and still do well. And I've got in my recollection times where I've done really, really well. So I think experience is a key part of that. Age seems to be a part of it, but only because you're experiencing things the more you live. And the more you realise that failure isn't the end of the world and it doesn't mean I'm a complete loser and I might want things, but I don't get to demand them. That doesn't change the odds. That doesn't change the chances. I think that it's the benefit of experience. But as I said before, or they've been exposed to some ideas. Maybe they're well read in Stoicism. Maybe they had a teacher or a psychologist or a coach that exposed them to this more nuanced, balanced way of thinking. And then they can get there quicker and those athletes seem more mature at a younger age because they have that kind of rational mindset. But whenever they develop it, I think they will find that it's useful. It's like anything, you have to wield it carefully. But at any point in any athlete's career, from a 9-year-old academy footballer all the way to end of career athlete, that rational mentality tends to hold people in good stead.
So here's one more question for you, Martin, and I want to pose this because I think Ellis would be proud of you for answering it, because Ellis loved falsification and he invited kind of criticism of REBT because it made the theory more robust. So Ben Proud, he narrowly missed out on the gold. He got a silver medal in the final. So if I put my cynical hat on and say, well, perhaps that's why he didn't get the gold. He didn't get the gold because he didn't want it enough. And perhaps the other athlete, obviously we don't know, maybe the other athlete was like, I must do this, and held that demand. What would your response be to that?
My response would be, don't care so much about different colours of metals. The deeper question is he pursuing his values? Is he in a good place mentally, physically? Has he got his life in order? Is he content and satisfied with the order of his life and the direction of his life? A gold medal isn't going to solve all your problems. Yes, we want the gold, and as somebody who's involved in sport, of course I understand the importance of performing and outcomes, and it has organisational and national level importance sometimes when we think about funding programs, for example. But for the individual, It's like you go out there, you do your best, you try to keep your life in order, try to have good relationships around you, pursue your values. And if at the end of that you get the gold medal, great. If you don't, well, at least you have your values in place. At least you've got your life in order. At least you've maintained your relationships. Or do you place demands on yourself and sacrifice everything in pursuit of the gold medal? You win your gold medal, but that's all you've got. You know? So I think within that balance, there is that stoic philosophy of not prizing external rewards too much.
I think this is what
it's a deeper question there, Stu. You know, it's a deeper question rather than would he have won the gold. You know, that's just the external reward.
Yeah, I think this is what Ellis, the founder of REBT, was quite vocal about this rejection of self-esteem for that reason. So we might sort of satisfy it short term. Okay, I got a gold medal. I feel really great. But then that doesn't last forever. Someone doesn't win a gold medal and then never experience a problem again. It doesn't matter because like 10 years ago, I got a gold medal. And it almost goes the other way around when we're constantly seeking external gratification. If we feel that we must get the gold medal or I would be worthless or I would be a loser, then once I've got it, now I've got to do something else to maintain my self-esteem. I've kind of fallen into this trap, this everlasting kind of circle of, well, now I've got to do something else to prove that I am worthy of being here. So I'm not accepting myself what I am. I'm accepting myself on these conditions. And the actual reality is that, I can't possibly win or succeed and do well all the time. And so I may feel kind of this short-term satisfaction, but long-term, there's going to be significant problems. And I actually make myself less likely to win, as we established earlier.
Well, sometimes there's a bit of a dichotomous choice to be made when you're pursuing anything. It's like, do you want to be cash rich but bankrupt in virtue? You know, and that's sometimes a choice that people make. They say, yes, I'd rather be rich. Well, your life is going to be difficult. You know, it's going to be difficult if you abandon virtue. And by virtue, I'm talking quite specifically, and maybe that's something we can talk about in a different episode. But if you take something, if you just turn virtue into morality or ethics or, the proper behaviour, socially beneficial behaviour, if you sacrifice all that, then yeah, you could be really rich. You won't have anything else though. You'd just have money. You'd just be alone in a mansion saying, oh, well, I haven't got any friends. So you're going to make, I think the evidence points towards we should pursue virtue and the outcomes, hopefully they reward us with resource and great. If I get that gold medal, great. But for that to be the whole drive, that external reward at the cost of everything else, which when you say I have to, is kind of saying that is shorthand. I have to. It's saying, well, there's no choice. I'm held hostage. It's an obligation. Forget everything else. I'll sacrifice it all because I must get that thing. Then you pay the price for that. You pay it with things like virtue, things like morality, ethics. If you're willing to do whatever it takes, then that's part of the bargain. And we know when we see athletes retire and come out of sport, we know some of the journeys they make. They look back and say, maybe I could have, chased those things less and thought more about how I was balancing my life and how I was trying to build towards long-term contentment. So it's kind of a lot comes out of that. Just that short example, doesn't it? And we could go on for ages, couldn't we? But we should probably call it there. Thanks, Stu. So this has been Martin and Stu at Rationally Speaking, and thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. In the next episode, we'll get into another example, I think, and kind of tease REBT out of that example, and maybe have a chat about how REBT, how we see it within that example.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.